In a world where wealth often builds invisible walls between people, one wealthy widow decided to tear those walls down only to discover a connection that would shock even the most seasoned hearts. Imagine opening your door to a stranger, a homeless veteran with eyes that have seen too much, only to find that those same eyes once stared into the face of your dying husband during his darkest hour. This isn't a plot twist from a movie, it's the breathtaking reality that unfolds when Amelia Davis, a widow clinging to memories of her war hero husband, answers loneliness with an act of radical compassion. People whispered as Alexander Phillips moved into the guest cottage of Willow Creek Estate. Why would she bring a homeless man into her home, they asked, their voices dripping with judgment. But Amelia wasn't just hiring a companion, she was unknowingly welcoming the man who had carried her husband through hell and back during the Vietnam War. The twist? Neither of them knew each other's identity until fate, with its signature dramatic flair, pulled back the curtains on a secret that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. What if the person you needed most in this world was someone you'd already passed on the street 1,000 times? What if healing from loss wasn't about moving forward, but about finally seeing what had been there all along? This story isn't just about a wealthy widow and a homeless veteran, it's about how history twists its threads through our lives, connecting us to people we never expected to meet in ways we never dared to imagine. The emotional journey that began with a simple ad for companionship becomes a masterclass in unexpected belonging and the redemptive power of finally being seen. In the quiet town of Maplewood, Amelia Davis found herself trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. The grand estate that once echoed with the laughter of her husband James now felt like a mausoleum of memories. "It's just me and these four walls," she muttered to herself as she wandered through the dusty library. The staff tiptoed around her, casting sympathetic glances that only deepened her isolation. One sleepless night, as the rain tapped against the windows like a mournful rhythm, she scribbled a note on the expensive stationery. Seeking companionship, it read, the words feeling foreign yet necessary. She paused, then added, someone who understands the weight of silence. The ad was placed the next morning, a small pebble dropped into the pond of her lonely existence. The responses began trickling in, each one more polished than the last. Letters from retired professors, eager retirees, even a distant relative seeking favor. Amelia scanned them with growing frustration. These people don't understand, she thought, tossing another letter onto the pile. Her late husband's voice echoed in her mind. Find someone who sees you, Amelia, not just the widow. The 10th letter caught her eye not because of its fancy script, but because of the simple, weathered paper and the brief message, I don't pretend to fill the void. Just someone to share the silence. No name, no elaborate promises, just honesty. She traced the wrinkled paper, feeling a strange pull. Maybe, she whispered, maybe this is the start. The interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Amelia stood at the window, watching the rain-soaked driveway. The staff buzzed with curiosity. Mrs. Davis never entertained guests anymore. A shadow moved at the gate, and her breath caught. The man approaching wasn't what she expected. No crisp suit or rehearsed smile. Just a quiet presence, his posture speaking. Of a discipline learned the hard way. His name was Alexander Phillips, though he didn't offer it immediately. Instead, he nodded, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of respect and wariness. "I served," he said simply when she asked about his background. The words hung in the air, a fragment of a story yet untold. Amelia noticed the way his hands rested on his lap, steady, controlled. "Stay for tea," she found herself saying, surprising even herself. He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Mom." Over steaming cups of Earl Grey, Amelia learned fragments of Alexander's story. He spoke little of himself, but his pauses said volumes. Vietnam was different," he said, his voice roughening. She didn't press, sensing the unspoken weight. Instead, she shared memories of James, careful not to overwhelm, yet eager to test the waters of connection. Alexander listened, his gaze never wavering. When she mentioned James' love for military history, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "I used to read those books too," he said softly. The afternoon blurred into evening, the fire crackling as they sat in companionable silence. Amelia realized with a start that the loneliness had lessened, not disappeared, but softened at the edges. "You'll stay," she said finally, "not as a job, as someone who belongs." The staff watched with a mix of concern and curiosity as Alexander moved into the guest cottage. Whispers followed him, too quiet. Those eyes have seen things. Why would Mrs. Davis choose him? But Amelia paid them no mind. Each morning, she found him on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise with a reverence that spoke of someone who had witnessed both beauty and darkness. They fell into a rhythm-shared meals, where conversation ebbed and flowed, walks through the garden, where Alexander pointed out plants with a knowledge that surprised her, quiet evenings with books that James had once cherished. Amelia noticed small things, the way he stood at attention when hearing the national anthem on TV, how he cut his meat into precise, uniform pieces, the occasional distant look that made her heart ache. "There's more to him," she thought one night as she watched him sleep on the porch swing. So much more. The question wasn't if she'd discover it, but when. The staff of Willow Creek Estate watched with a mix of curiosity and disapproval as Amelia Davis interviewed candidates for the companion position. Whispers filled the hallways. "She's interviewing another one. Do you think she'll ever find the right person?" But Amelia paid them no mind. Her heart had settled on someone unexpected. Alexander Phillips stood at the doorway, his posture straight. Despite the worn clothes that hung loosely on his frame, the staff exchanged glances. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, cleared her throat disapprovingly. "Mrs. Davis, are you certain about this?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. He's homeless, for goodness sake." Amelia met her gaze steadily. "He's a veteran," she said, her voice firm, "and he understands loneliness in a way none of you ever could." The room fell silent as Alexander stepped forward, his eyes meeting Amelia's with a quiet intensity. "I'll do my best, Mom," he said, his voice rough but respectful. The staff murmured among themselves, but Amelia had made her choice. "Prepare the guest cottage," she instructed, ignoring their horrified gasps. "Mr. Phillips will be staying with us." As Alexander settled into the cottage, the staff's skepticism grew into open disapproval. Bringing a homeless man into the estate, Mrs. Henderson clucked, shaking her head as she polished a silver tray. What would Mr. James think? The question hung in the air, a ghostly reproach. Amelia overheard and paused in the hallway, her hand resting on the banister. "James would understand," she said softly, though the words caught in her throat. That night, as Alexander tended to the Gardena task he'd volunteered for with surprising skill, Amelia watched from the window. His movements were precise, methodical, each weed pulled with the same care he might have given to handling explosives. "He's not what they expect," she murmured to herself. But neither was James in the beginning. The staff's judgment weighed heavily, but Amelia's resolve strengthened with each passing day. Alexander didn't just occupy space in her home. He began in small ways to fill it. The tension reached a boiling point during breakfast one morning. The staff had taken to casting sideways glances whenever Alexander entered the dining room, their disapproval as palpable as the silence that followed his footsteps. Amelia had grown tired of the undercurrent of criticism. "Enough," she declared, setting her napkin down with a sharp clap. The room stilled. "Mr. Phillips is here by my invitation, and will remain as long as I deem fit." Her words hung in the air, a challenge to anyone who might oppose her. Alexander, ever the picture of composure, simply nodded and returned to his meal. That evening, as Amelia reviewed household accounts in the study, Alexander appeared in the doorway. "Mom," he began, his voice tinged with hesitation, "I don't want to cause trouble." Amelia looked up, her irritation melting away. "You won't," she said firmly. "This is my home and my decision." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Amelia saw not just a veteran or a companion, but a man worthy of respect, despite the world's judgment. Word of Amelia's unusual hiring choice soon spread beyond the estate's gates, carried on the wings of gossip. By the staffs, relatives and friends. Neighbors who had once extended polite invitations to tea now whispered behind fans and shutters. "The widow Davis has taken in a homeless veteran," they'd say, their tones ranging from pity to scandalized intrigue. Amelia caught wind of the rumors during a visit to the village market, where shopkeepers averted their eyes and hurried conversations fell silent. She straightened her spine, channeling the same dignity that had defined her marriage. "Let them talk," she murmured to herself, purchasing her groceries with deliberate calm. Back at the estate, she found Alexander repairing the old garden bench, a task he'd undertaken with the same meticulous care he applied to everything. "They're saying things about you," she said, sitting beside him. Alexander didn't look up. "I've heard worse in the jungle," he replied, his voice flat. Amelia studied his profile, the scar tracing his jawline, the intensity in his eyes. "You're more than what they see," she said softly. He nodded, though whether in agreement or resignation, she couldn't tell. The staff's judgment might linger, but Amelia's faith in her decision had taken root, deep and unshakable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of amber and violet, Amelia found Alexander on the porch. He was sharpening a garden tool with deliberate strokes, his focus absolute. She hesitated at the door, watching the way the light caught the edges of his weathered face. "They still don't approve," she said finally, her voice gentle. Alexander glanced up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Never expected them to, Mom." His use of Mom was a habit from his military days, one that Amelia had come to appreciate for its sincerity rather than subservience. "Why do you stay then?" she asked, surprising herself with the bluntness. Alexander set down the tool, meeting her gaze squarely. "Because someone needed to," he said simply. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Amelia's heart stirred a recognition of shared purpose, of quieter battles fought long after the public ones had ended. The staff's disapproval faded in that moment, replaced by something deeper, a silent understanding that some choices transcended judgment, woven instead from threads of honor and unexpected belonging. Alexander Phillips moved through the estate, like a shadow, quiet, unobtrusive, yet impossible to ignore. His initial days were marked by a careful distance, as though he were guarding not just Amelia's space, but his own fragile peace. "Good morning, Mom," he'd say each dawn, his voice a low rumble that carried weight without volume. The staff, though skeptical, couldn't fault his impeccable manners. He held doors with a gentleman's grace, offered considered opinions when asked, and maintained a buffer of respect that Amelia found oddly comforting. "He treats me as though I'm still the wife of a war hero," she mused one evening, tracing the photograph of her late husband on the mantelpiece. Alexander's reserve wasn't coldness, it was a fortress built after too many battles, its gates slowly creaking open only when he deemed it safe. Amelia sensed the struggle beneath his composure, the way his fingers tightened on his coffee cup when thunder rolled, the fleeting shadows crossing his eyes when helicopters passed overhead. Patience, she reminded herself, recalling James' similar caution after returning from deployment. Some wounds heal in private. The rhythm of the household shifted subtly under Alexander's quiet discipline. He rose before dawn, his morning routine precise as a military drill mattress made with hospital corners, dishes washed and dried before Amelia even stirred. "You don't have to do all that," she protested one morning, finding the kitchen spotless. Alexander simply shrugged. "Habits die hard, Mum." His presence brought an unexpected structure to the estate's staff members, found themselves straightening their postures, completing tasks with the same meticulous care he applied to everything. "It's like having a drill sergeant without the barking," the young gardener joked, though there was respect in his smile. Amelia observed these changes with growing fascination. Alexander didn't just occupy space, he transformed it, his disciplined nature bleeding into the very walls. "James had that same effect," she murmured during a quiet moment in the library. Alexander, polishing a shelf nearby, paused. "Sir James was a good man," he said softly, without looking up. The unspoken connection hung between them, a thread waiting to be pulled. Meals with Alexander became a study in controlled interaction. He sat across from Amelia at the polished oak table, his posture straight as a recruit's, hands resting neatly on his lap. "How was your day?" she'd ask, watching as his eyes flickered with surprise before settling into a practiced response. He spoke of parks he'd visited, books he'd read, surface details that hinted at richer depths beneath. Amelia found herself mirroring his careful tone, their conversations a delicate dance of half-revealed truths. "The beef is well prepared, Ma'am," he complimented during one dinner, his voice carrying the faintest echo of an accent Amelia couldn't place. She smiled. The cook would appreciate that. Their exchanges were punctuated by comfortable silences, during which Alexander would often stare out the window, lost in thoughts Amelia didn't dare interrupt. One evening, as rain tapped against the glass, she noticed a faint scar tracing his temple, a silent testament to stories he hadn't yet shared. "You've seen things," she said gently. Alexander's gaze met hers, steady but guarded. "We all have our battles, Ma'am," he replied, the conversation dissolving into the patter of rain. Amelia's curiosity deepened, not as an intrusion, but as a quiet determination to honor whatever sorrows he carried. As weeks passed, Amelia began to recognize the patterns of Alexander's days. Mornings were spent in rigorous activity, gardening, repairs, long walks that left his cheeks flushed and his shoulders relaxed. Afternoons found him buried in books from the estate's library, his fingers tracing the pages with a reverence that suggested stories beyond the text. Evenings were reserved for quiet reflection on the porch, where he'd sit with a glass of water, watching the twilight as though committing it to memory. "You have a routine," Amelia observed one afternoon, finding him sanding an old picture frame in the workshop. Alexander glanced up, a small smile playing on his lips. "Old habits," he said simply. Amelia watched him work, noting the precision of his movements, the way he measured each stroke as though it held meaning beyond the task. "It's peaceful," she said, meaning both the scene and the quiet discipline that defined him. Alexander nodded. His focus never wavered. "Structure keeps the demons at bay," he murmured, not unkindly. Amelia's heart ached with recognition. James had spoken similar words during his darker nights. The parallel between the two men deepened her resolve to understand Alexander's past, not out of curiosity, but from a growing sense that their fates were intertwined in ways she couldn't yet see. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm. Alexander had retreated to the guest cottage early, but the crack of lightning drew Amelia to the porch. She found him there, standing in the downpour, his face tilted skyward, as though washing away invisible burdens. "Mr. Phillips," she called, concern battling the rain's roar. Alexander turned, surprise breaking through his composure. "Two was just," he stammered, stepping back as though caught in some private ritual. Amelia approached, noticing the sheen of tears mingling with raindrops on his cheeks. "It's all right," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. The contact seemed to startle him, but he didn't pull away. "The storms," he began, his voice cracking. "They take me back." Amelia understood without needing details the echo of Vietnam in every thunderclap, the unanswered screams, in every flash of lightning. "James had his triggers too," she said gently. Alexander's eyes widened, a connection sparking between them. "Your husband," he started, but Amelia shook her head. "Not tonight," she said, leading him inside. As she dried his coat, Amelia felt the walls of his reserve beginning to tremble, not from the storm outside, but from the shared weight of memories they both carried. The distance between them narrowed, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity. Alexander's discipline, his respect, they were armor. But beneath it, Amelia glimpsed the vulnerable man who had saved her husband and lost himself in the process. And in that moment, she knew their journey was only beginning. Amelia's observations of Alexander grew more deliberate with each passing day, as though she were piecing together a puzzle whose edges blurred into mystery. During breakfast one morning, she watched him slice his eggs into perfect quarters, each movement economical and precise. "Like a surgeon," she murmured, earning a glance from Alexander. "Habit, Mom," he said simply, though his eyes flickered with unspoken stories. The way he stood at the window after lunch back straight, weight balanced evenly on both feet, reminded her of James during his formal portraits. "You have the presence of a man who's commanded respect without asking for it," Amelia said, setting down. Her teacup, Alexander's lips twitched. Survival often demands precision. The words hung in the air, a bridge between his past and her curiosity. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Amelia noticed how he cut his steak into uniform bites, each one chewed with methodical care. "The military teaches you to find order even in chaos," she said softly. Alexander nodded, the firelight catching the scar on his jaw. "Some lessons never leave you, Mom." Amelia's fingers tightened on her glass. "James used to do that too," she said, the connection sparking between them like static. Alexander's gaze locked onto hers, a question unasked. "Tell me about Vietnam, Amelia," said her voice steady with resolve. The words seemed to unsettle him, yet he didn't look away. "It was a different kind of war," he began, the first crack in his reserve. The shared rhythms of their days became a gentle tug-of-war between Alexander's guardedness and Amelia's quiet persistence. During their evening meals, the conversation shifted from the weather to books, Alexander's eyes lighting up when Amelia mentioned James' favorite war memoirs. "Sir James had good taste," Alexander said, his voice warming fractionally. "He carried the things they carried in his pack," Amelia replied, watching Alexander's fingers pause over his fork. "I read it once," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "The weight of those stories." His voice trailed off, and Amelia sensed the unspoken burden. Their walks through the garden evolved too, from stiffly polite to companionable silence, punctuated by Alexander's occasional observations about the plants. "This hydrangea needs more acid in the soil," or "the roses here remind me of—" He stopped himself, flushing faintly. Amelia didn't press. Instead, she brought him a well-worn copy of Slaughterhouse-5, one rainy afternoon. "James loved this," she said, placing it on the coffee table. Alexander's thumb brushed the cover. "Kurt Vonnegut," he said, almost to himself. He understood the disorientation of war. That night, as Amelia waited for him to return the book, she found him on the porch, reading by the light of a lantern. "You're good at this, not prying, just offering," he said, looking up. Amelia smiled. "Sometimes the best conversations happen between the lines." Alexander closed the book slowly. "My father used to say that too," he murmured, the first hint of vulnerability breaking through. The air between them shifted, the unspoken stories hovering like fireflies. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm that shook the estate like a terrier with a rat. Alexander had retreated to the guest cottage, but Amelia found him on the porch, his face turned skyward, as though absorbing the rain's rhythm. "The storms," he began, his voice catching. "They take me back." Amelia stepped beside him, the rain dampening her hair. "James used to pace during storms," she said softly. Said it reminded him of the monsoons. Alexander's eyes darkened. "Vietnam was a different kind of hell," he said, his words measured. "The jungle, it doesn't let you forget, even when you're halfway across the world." Amelia listened, her heart aching, with recognition. "You saved lives there," she said, recalling the rumors that had followed James home. Alexander's laugh was bitter. "I tried to." He turned to her, his gaze searching. "Sometimes the ones you save end up saving you too." The implication hung in the rain-scented air. Amelia's breath caught. "My husband," she started, but Alexander held up a hand. "Not tonight, Mom." His voice was gentle but firm. "Some stories need time to breathe." They stood together until the storm passed, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger with each shared silence. When Alexander finally spoke again, his words were a whisper against the dying wind. "I was a medic," he said. "Simply, that's all you need to know for now." Amelia nodded, understanding that some truths unfold like blossoms slowly and only when ready. The following week, Amelia approached Alexander with the delicate care one might use when handling a wounded bird. They were in the library, the afternoon, sun filtering through dust motes as Alexander polished an antique globe. "You never talk about your service," she said, her voice soft as a feather. Alexander paused, his reflection in the globe's surface showing a mix of wariness and something else, hope. "There's not much to say, Mum," he replied, resuming his work. Amelia moved to stand beside him, her fingers brushing the globe's cool surface. "My husband was an officer in Vietnam," she said quietly. Alexander's hand stilled. "I know," he said, so softly she almost missed it. "James mentioned you once in one of his letters home." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "What did he say?" Alexander's gaze met hers, steady but guarded. "That you waited for him, with a patience that deserved a medal." The words were a key turning in a lock. Amelia's voice grew steadier. "Alexander, did you serve with him?" The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Alexander's thumb traced a country's border on the globe. "Let's walk," he said finally, not answering but not closing the door either. As they stepped into the garden, Amelia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The connection she'd sensed was a thread of shared history waiting to be unraveled. "Some stories," Alexander said after a long moment, "are better told in the open air." The night unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. They sat on the porch swing, the summer air thick with the scent of jasmine and the distant hum of crickets. Alexander's voice broke the silence, low and unadorned. There was this mission. He stopped himself, shaking his head. "No, maybe I should start from the beginning." Amelia waited, her hands folded in her lap. "It was 68, he said finally. Tet offensive. My unit was assigned to a convoy delivering supplies to a remote outpost." His fingers tapped a rhythm on his knee, a leftover habit from the war, Amelia suspected. "We hit an ambush. Ambushes in the jungle, they come fast, and they're messy." He paused, his breath hitching almost imperceptibly. "I was the medic. Got separated from the group early on. Found this officer pretty torn up, hiding in a bomb crater. He was losing a lot of blood, but he kept fashing." Alexander's voice roughened. "He kept fashing about his wife waiting for him. Said her name was Amelia." The porch seemed to hold its breath. I patched him up as best I could, dragged him back through the crossfire, got him to the extraction point just as the helicopters came in. Alexander looked at Amelia, his eyes searching hers. He never told me his name, just kept repeating Amelia, Amelia. The world tilted beneath Amelia's feet. James, she whispered. Alexander nodded, the unspoken confirmation hanging between them like a lifeline. Your husband, he said softly. He was a good man, one of the bravest I ever knew. Amelia's vision blurred, but she nodded. He never told me the details, she said, her voice breaking, just that a medic saved him. Alexander's hand found hers, tentative but firm. Some stories stay with you, he said, not out of pride, but because they're a part of you. The porch swing creaked softly, the only sound in the charged silence. Amelia knew, without a doubt, that their lives had collided in ways neither could have imagined, and that the truth, however painful, was finally within reach. Amelia sat frozen on the porch swing, Alexander's words echoing in her ears like a distant church bell. He kept fashing about his wife, Amelia, Alexander had said, his voice raw with unshed emotion. The name hung in the air, a bridge between past and present. Amelia's fingers trembled as she reached into her pocket, pulling out the small silver locket she always carried. Inside was a photograph of James, his smile bright despite the war's shadows. He never spoke of the medic who saved him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander watched her, his own hands clenched tightly in his lap. I didn't know, he said, the words heavy with regret. If I had known. How could you? Amelia interrupted, her voice steadying. He didn't even know your name. The realization hit her. Like a physical force, Alexander's quiet habits, his military precision, the way he'd flinch at certain noises. It all made sense now, fitting together like pieces of a long-lost puzzle. You're the one, she said, her voice breaking. You're the man who gave me more years with him. Alexander nodded, his eyes glistening. I just wished I could have done more. The porch seemed to shrink around them. The world narrowed to this moment of painful clarity. Amelia's mind raced, not with anger, but with a profound sense of connection. All these years, she murmured, and you were right here all along. Alexander's hand found hers again, this time with a quiet certainty. Some debts can't be repaid, he said softly, but maybe they can be honored. The air between them thrummed, with unspoken questions, but for the first time, Amelia felt a fragile hope taking root. The hours that followed were a dance of revelation and remembrance. Amelia led Alexander to the study, where James' military medals rested in a display case, each one accompanied by a typed description. The bronze star here, Amelia said, her finger hovering over a particular medal. James never talked about how he got it, just said something about a medic who didn't believe in leaving men behind. Alexander's breath hitched. That was me, he said, his voice thick. I didn't think he remembered. Amelia turned to him, her eyes glistening. He remembered everything. She pulled out a yellowed letter from a drawer. This was sent to me after he died. A comrade mentioned a medic named Phillips who carried him through hell itself. Alexander stared at the letter, his fingers trembling. I tried to write, he said, his voice breaking. But how do you explain something like that to a stranger? Amelia stepped closer, her hand finding his shoulder. You weren't a stranger, she said firmly. You were his savior. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Alexander's eyes met hers, a mixture of pain and something warmer. I just did my job, he said, but Amelia could see the doubt in his eyes. Some jobs, she replied softly, are meant to be remembered. The room fell silent, the weight of their discovery settling like dust. Amelia realized with a start that this wasn't just about James, it was about Alexander finding his place in a world that had forgotten him. You're not alone anymore, she said gently. Alexander's lips twitched in a small smile. Feels like I'm not, he murmured. The connection between them deepened, not just through words, but through the shared understanding that some truths, once uncovered, change everything. As dawn began to paint the sky in soft pinks and blues, Amelia and Alexander sat together on the worn leather sofa in the study, exhaustion mingling with a strange sense of exhilaration. "All this time," Amelia said, her voice filled with wonder, "we were living in the same town, yet strangers." Alexander nodded, his eyes reflecting the morning light. "Fate has a twisted sense of humor," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Amelia countered. "Or maybe it's not twisted at all. Maybe it's deliberate." She paused, considering the weight of their connection. James used to say that some people are put in our paths for a reason. Alexander looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I always believed in coincidence," he admitted, "but tonight—" He trailed off, unable to find the words. Amelia placed a hand on his arm. "This isn't a coincidence," she said firmly. "This is a second chance." Alexander's gaze met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. "A second chance at what?" he asked, though he seemed to already know the answer. Amelia's response was gentle but resolute. At healing, at belonging, at honoring a man who deserved so much more than either of us can give. The words hung in the air, a promise forming between them. Alexander took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I know how to do this," he confessed. Amelia smiled warmly. "Neither am I. But well, figure it out together." The simplicity of her statement carried a profound weight, marking the beginning of a new chapter neither could have anticipated. The emotional weight of the revelation settled on Amelia like a heavy blanket, both comforting and suffocating. She turned to Alexander, her eyes filled with tears that she made no effort to hide. "You gave me more time with him," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "More laughter, more memories, more love." Alexander's expression softened, though a shadow lingered in his eyes. "I was just doing my job," he reiterated, but his words lacked conviction. Amelia shook her head, her hand finding his once more. "To you, it was a mission. To me, it was a gift." The raw honesty in her words seemed to crack something within Alexandra. Wall built over years of silent service and unacknowledged sacrifice. "No one ever called it a gift," he murmured, his voice breaking. Amelia's heart ached for the man who had carried such a heavy burden in silence. "Then consider this my way of repaying the debt," she said softly. "By seeing you, Alexander, not just the uniform, not just the medals, but you." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken gratitude and the beginnings of a deeper connection. Amelia realized with clarity that this moment was a turning point not just for her, but for Alexander as well. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she said gently. Alexander's eyes met hers, a flicker of hope replacing the shadows. "Maybe," he said, his voice tentative but stronger, "I don't have to." The words hung between them, a fragile bridge between past and future. The morning light filtered through the study windows, casting long shadows across the room as Alexander sat in one of the leather armchairs, his posture slumped in a rare display of vulnerability. Amelia watched him from the doorway, her heart aching at the sight of his familiar reserve crumbling. "I never thought anyone would want to know," he said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "After the war, I just disappeared. Became a ghost in the edges of society." He laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the silence. "The government gives you a medal, pats you on the back, and then forgets you exist. The public? They turn away, too uncomfortable with the truth of what was done in their name." Amelia stepped closer, her presence a quiet anchor. "But I see you," she said firmly, "really see you." Alexander's eyes met hers, filled with a pain that transcended words. "No one's ever tried," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I stopped expecting it." The honesty hung between them, heavy yet liberating. Amelia reached out, her hand finding his in a gesture that spoke of connection rather than pity. "Then consider this your second chance," she said gently, "to be seen, to be valued, to belong." Alexander's fingers tightened around hers, a silent promise forming between them. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to believe that healing might be possible. The transformation began slowly, like a dormant garden awakening to spring. Amelia approached Alexander one evening as he tended to the roses James had once planted, their petals now mingling with new growth. The guest, "Cottage is yours as long as you need it," she said, her voice steady with purpose. Alexander paused, his hands resting on the garden tools. "I'm grateful, Mom," he began, but Amelia shook her head. "It's not just about shelter," she interrupted. "It's about family." The word hung in the air, charged with possibility. Alexander's gaze lifted to meet hers, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Family," he repeated, the concept seeming foreign yet tantalizing. Amelia nodded. "James would want this," she said softly. "He always believed in second chances." Alexander's throat worked as he swallowed past the lump that had formed. "I don't know how to be part of a family," he admitted, his vulnerability striking. Amelia, with its sincerity, she stepped closer, her hand finding his shoulder in a gesture of warmth. "Neither do we not anymore," she confessed, "but we can learn together." The simple statement hung between them, a fragile promise. Alexander's lips twitched in a small, hesitant smile. "I'd like that," he said quietly. The moment marked a turning point, not grand, not dramatic, but profound in its simplicity. Amelia felt a weight lift, knowing that this offer extended beyond mere companionship. It was the beginning of something deeper, richer, and more enduring. The first ritual began almost organically, as though James himself had guided their hands. Amelia discovered an old military journal in the attic, its pages filled with James' observations from Vietnam. She brought it to Alexander during one of their afternoon walks through the garden. "He wrote about you," she said softly, opening to a dog-eared page. Alexander's breath hitched as he read James' words describing the medic who carried him through hell and back. "He called you his guardian angel," Amelia murmured, watching Alexander's eyes glisten with unshed tears. Together, they decided to transform the neglected greenhouse into a memorial garden, planting flowers mentioned in James' letters alongside species native to Vietnam. Alexander's knowledge of the region's flora proved invaluable, his hands gentle as he arranged each seedling with the care of one performing a sacred duty. "This is how we honor him," Amelia said one evening as they watered the nascent garden by lantern light. Alexander nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "By remembering not just the man, but the mission." The project became their shared labor of love, a tangible connection to James that transcended mere words or memories. Neighbors, initially curious, began to assist, drawn by the quiet purpose that defined their work. The greenhouse, once a forgotten space, became a community tribute, a living memorial, where James' legacy flourished in color and fragrance. Alexander found in the garden not just a way to honor his fallen comrade, but a sense of belonging he'd thought forever lost. Months passed, weaving their days into a tapestry of mutual support and growth. The staff, once skeptical, now watched Alexander and Amelia with quiet respect as they moved through the austere pair, united not by blood, but by choice. Alexander's military discipline found new expression in community service projects he organized. With local veterans, his leadership drawing strength from hard-won experience. "You've become quite the community figure," Amelia teased one evening as he reviewed plans for a veterans garden workshop. Alexander smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his features. "Someone had to step up," he said modestly. "Besides, it gives me purpose." Amelia's heart swelled with pride and something deeper love, perhaps, though she hadn't yet named it. Their evenings were spent in the greenhouse or on the porch, sharing stories that spanned continents and decades. Alexander spoke of firefights and fleeting victories, while Amelia recounted James' quiet heroism on the home front. In these moments, the lines between past and present blurred, their bond strengthened by shared laughter and tears. "We've become family," Alexander observed one starlit night, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. Amelia nodded, her hand finding his in the dark. "A different kind of family," she agreed, "but family nonetheless." The words settled between them like a benediction. What had begun as a transactional arrangement had blossomed into something profound, a union of souls, healing old wounds, finding purpose in shared mission, and discovering that family sometimes is the family we choose. Their journey was far from over, but in each other's company, they'd found a home they'd never expected to share. We've journeyed together through the unexpected twists of Amelia and Alexander's story, a tale where history's shadows weave through the present, creating bonds that transcend time and circumstance. As we reach the end of this emotional journey, we're left with a profound truth. Healing often comes from the most unlikely places, and family isn't always defined by blood, but by the choices we make in our darkest moments. Before we part ways, we'd love to hear from you. Did the emotional reveal between Amelia and Alexander move you in ways you weren't expecting? What moment resonated deepest with your own experiences of loss and unexpected connection? And be completely honest, were you anticipating the twist that would link Alexander to James' past, or did fate's dramatic reveal catch you off guard? Your thoughts matter to us. Take a moment to like this video if you found value in Amelia and Alexander's journey. Share the moment that touched you most in the comments below. We promise to read every single one. And if this unexpected resolution left you with mixed emotions, we want to hear about that too. Did you want a different ending? Or did the story's conclusion satisfy your hopes for these characters? Don't forget to follow our channel. We're committed to bringing you stories that explore the beautiful complexity of human connection and hate for you to miss what comes next. The path of healing and belonging that Amelia and Alexander have begun is just the start of many meaningful narratives we have planned. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Now let's continue the conversation. You have thoughts, and we can't wait to hear them.